What's up everybody, Aditya Mahajan here and welcome back to yet another YouTube video. So this playlist we have covered Android development, Django, C++ and today we'll be looking at top interview questions of Node.js. So as usual, we are on the interview bit site and they have divided the questions into beginner, intermediate and advanced. So as usual, I'm making this video so that we do not procrastinate during the revision. So without the further ado, let's get started. We'll be starting with a code by Jeff Atwood, that is any application that can be written in JavaScript and will eventually be written in JavaScript. So initially at the start, they are saying the same thing, that how this applies to the current scenario. So Gen Z backend. So after jQuery animation, dev shifted to a single page application for better control of UI and UX. And then came some front-end frameworks like AngularJS, Angular, and JavaScript was made to available to port into literally any modern machine that exists and runs a standalone application, that is Node.js. So it was widely accepted as backend framework, and it comes to top like second year in a row in 2020 of Stack Overflow survey. Now let's get started with some of the basic questions. So the first question what we have is, what is the first class function in JavaScript? So when a function can be treated like any other variable, then those functions are called as first class function. So there are multiple programming languages which follow this, like JavaScript is one of them. And now because the function can be passed as parameter to another function, callback, or function can return another function, high order function. So map and filter are high order functions that are popularly used. Next question is, what is Node.js and how it works? So it is a virtual machine that uses JavaScript as scripting language and runs Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. So it is an event-driven architecture where input output are asynchronous. Asynchronous meaning they do not have to be in sequence, and multiple things do not have to wait for each other. So making it lightweight and efficient. So it is being used in developing desktop application with the help of a framework called as Electron, as it provides API access to operating system level features like file system, network, etc. So how do you manage packages in your Node.js project? So it can be managed by a number of package installer and their configuration file accordingly. But the most popular one is NPM or Yarn. Both provide almost all libraries of JavaScript with extended features of controlling environment-specific configuration. To maintain versions of libs that are being installed, we use package.json or package-log.json so that there is no issue while porting to some other different environment for that. Moving on to the next question. How Node.js is better than other framework most popularly used? I wouldn't say better, but like all of the things have their own use cases. Some is better in some, other is better in other things. So they provide simplicity in development, that is Node.js provides simplicity because of its non-blocking IO code, and event-based model results in short response time and concurrent processing. Unlike other frameworks where developers have used thread management. So it runs Chrome's V8 engine, which is written in C++ and is highly performant with constant improvement. Also, JavaScript is both used in front end and back end, so which would be much faster in development. And also, Node.js has quite a lot of libraries, so we do not have to reinvent the wheel for doing any particular task. Moving on to the next question, explain the steps how control flow controls the function calls. So there are 4 points that they have covered, that is control the order of execution, collect data, limit concurrency, and call the following step in the program. So next question is, what are some commonly used timing features in Node.js? First is set timeout or clear timeout. This is used to implement delays in code execution. Then we have set interval or clear interval, used to run a code of block multiple number of times. Then we have set immediate or clear immediate. Any function passed as set immediate argument is a callback that's executed in next iteration of the event loop. Next, we have process.nextTick. So this is very similar to set immediate, but you may prefer one over the other on your callbacks urgency. Next question is, what are the advantages of using promises instead of callbacks? So the main advantage of using promise is you get an object to decide the action that needs to be taken after the async task completes. This gives more manageable code and avoid callback hell. Moving on to the next question, question number 8. What is fork in Node.js? So fork in general is used to spawn child processes. In Node, it is used to create a new instance of V8 engine to run multiple workers to execute the code. Question number 9. Why is Node.js single-threaded? Node.js was created explicitly as an experiment in async processing. This was tried to a new theory of doing async processing on single thread over the existing thread-based implementation of scaling via different frameworks. Question number 10. How do you create a simple server in Node.js that returns hello world? So basically, this is the code snippet. We create a HTTP variable, and this is the module required that we have. Then we call a create server function, which takes in a request and response, and then for the response we write 200, and then content type that, so the text is plain text because we are just returning hello world, and the response is hello world, and then we are listening to the port 3000. How many types of API functions are there in Node.js? So there are two types of API functions: asynchronous non-blocking functions, mostly input output operations which can fork out of the main loop. Synchronous and blocking functions, mostly operations that influence the process running in the main loop. What is REPL? So PL in Node.js stand for REPL in Node.js stands for read, eval, print, and loop, which further means evaluating code on the go. List down two arguments that async.queue takes as input. So the two arguments that it takes is task function and concurrency value. Moving on to question number 14, what is the purpose of module.export? So this is used to expose functions of particular module or file to be used elsewhere in the project. So basically making it kind of public so that everyone else can be any other function can use this. This can be used to encapsulate all similar function in a file, which further improves the project structure. For example, you have a file for all utils functions with util to get solution in different programming language of a problem statement. So we have a get solution in JavaScript, and we have a async call. Then we have a problem ID. Then we have get solution in Python and async call with the same problem ID. And then we are doing module.export, get solution in JavaScript, get solution in Python. So basically they have created two functions, and then those are to be exported so that anyone else can use with the help of module.exports. Thus, using module.export, we can use this function in some other file. So for using them in other, we just do const and put those function name, and we require /utils. Moving on to question number 15, what tools can be used to assure consistent code style? So ESLint can be used with any IDE to ensure a consistent coding style, which further helps in maintaining the code base. Moving on to some intermediate Node.js questions. So question number 16 is, what do you understand by callback hell? So whenever we have multiple nested async function calls inside each other, then it becomes difficult to handle the things with that. For example, we have multiple function A, B, C, D, which are called inside one another. So for example, we are passing callback functions, and it makes the code unreadable and not maintainable. Thus, we would change the async logic to avoid this. Question number 17 is, what is an event loop in Node.js? So whatever that is async is managed by event loop using a queue and a listener. So we get the idea using the following diagram. That is, we have an event emitter, and then whenever an event is triggered, then it is handled by event loop and with the help of event handler. So when an async function needs to be executed or input output, the main thread sends it to different thread, allowing VR to keep executing the main code. Event loop involves different phases with specific tasks such as timer, pending callbacks, idle or prepare, poll, check, close callbacks with different first in first out queues. Also, in between different iterations, it checks for async IO or timers and shut down cleanly if there aren't any. Moving on to next question, question number 18. If Node.js is single threaded, then how does it handle concurrency? Now the main loop and single threaded are all async, and calls are managed by a libuv library. So for example, in this example, they have used two modules, actually one only, which requires crypto, and then they have taken start, which is the current time. And in the log function, I think they are calling a function from crypto module, and then they are just calculating the time. So when we log, when we call this particular function, then we have different times in it. So this is because libuv sets up a thread pool to handle such concurrency. How many threads will be there in the thread pool depends upon the number of cores, but you can override this. Now question number 19 asks differentiate between process.nextTick and setImmediate. So both can be used to switch to an asynchronous mode of operation by listener functions. Now process.nextTick sets the callback to execute, but setImmediate pushes the callback to queue to be executed. So the event loop runs in the following manner, that is we have timers, then we have pending callbacks, then idle or prepare, then we have connections, that is poll or data, then we have check, and then we close the callbacks. In this process.nextTick method adds the callback function to the start of the next event queue and setImmediate method to place the function in check phase of the next event queue. Moving on to question number 20, how does Node.js overcome the problem of blocking of input-output operations? So since the node has an event loop that can be used to handle all the input-output operations in an asynchronous manner without blocking the main function. So for example, if some network call need to happen, it will be scheduled in event loop instead of main thread, that is single thread. And if there are multiple such input-output calls, each one of them will be queued accordingly to be executed other than the main thread. Now, even though we have single threaded JS, IO operations are handled in a non-blocking way. Question number 21 is that how can we use async await in Node.js? So here is an example of async await pattern. This code is to retry exponential backoff. So this is basically, you might have seen it while using a Gmail. When your network is gone, there would be a slight pop-up which would retry if connecting to the internet after the exponential time. So initially it would be 2 seconds, then 4, then 8, then 16 seconds, and so on. So here we have a wait function which takes in a parameter as timeout, and then we have an internal function called which basically have set timeout and then the resolve, and we are just passing that particular timeout which we got. Now in the another function, async function, we have request with retry which passes the URL which we need to hit, and then we have a maximum retries, how many times we have to try. So for every retry, what we are doing is we are putting it in a try catch block. If we are able to hit that particular request and we are getting the response, we are good to go. Or else if we are having the error, then we take the timeout, which would be the power function of 2 and what is the current retry, so that the time keeps on increasing every time we retries. And then we just do we just log it to the console and we just wait. Moving on to next question, number 22, what is Node.js streams? So streams are instances of event emitter which can be used to work with streaming data in Node.js. So they can be used for handling and manipulating streaming large files, which could be videos, MP3, etc. And they use buffers as their temporary storage. Now there are mainly 4 types of string. We have writable, readable, duplex, and transform. So in which the streams in which data can be written are writable. For example, fs.create write stream. The streams in which the data can just be read, for example, fs.create read stream. Streams which are readable as well as writable, for example, net.socket. And transform duplex streams that can modify or transform the data as it is written and read, for example, zlib.create deflate. Question number 23, what is Node.js buffers? So in general, buffer is a temporary memory that is mainly used by stream to hold on some data until it is used. So buffers are introduced with additional use case than JavaScript's unit 8 array, and are mainly used to represent a fixed length sequence of bytes. This also supports legacy encoding like ASCII, UTF-8, etc. And it is fixed, non-resizable, allocated memory outside the V8. Moving on to next question, question number 24. What is middleware? Middleware comes in between your request and the business logic. That is whenever a browser hits, that is client side, and whatever business logic we have implemented. So it is mainly used to capture logs and enable rate limit, routing, authentication. Basically, whatever that is not part of business logic. These are third-party middlewares also, such as body parsers, and you can write your own middleware for a specific use case. Moving on to next question, explain what a reactor pattern in Node.js is. So reactor pattern is a pattern for non-blocking IO operations, but in general, this is used for any event-driven architecture. So there are two components. One is reactor, other is handler. So a reactor's job is to dispatch the input output event to appropriate handlers, and handler's job is to actually work on those particular events. Now, moving on to question number 26. Why should you separate Express app and server? So the server is responsible for initializing the routes, middleware, and other application logic, whereas the app has all the business logic which will be served by the routes initiated by the server. Now, this ensures that the business logic is encapsulated and decoupled from the application logic, which makes the project more readable and maintainable. Question number 27 asks, for Node.js, why Google uses V8 engine? So, well, are there any other options available? Yes, of course. We have like SpiderMonkey from Firefox, Chakra from Edge. But Google's V8 is most evolved and is an open source. So there is a huge community helping in developing the features and fixing bugs. And it is fastest as C++, it is written in C++, which is literally faster than Java, Python, or most of the languages that we have. We got till now as JavaScript and WebAssembly engine, and it is portable to almost every machine node. So describe the exit codes of Node.js. Exit codes give us an idea about how a process got terminated and the reason behind it. First is uncaught fatal exception with code 1. This is an exception. This means that there is an exception which has not been handled. Then we have next is unused, which is code 2 is resolved by bash. Then we have fatal error code 5. There has been error with V8 with std error output of description. Internal exception handler runtime failure, which is code 7. There has been an exception when bootstrapping function was called. Internal JavaScript evaluation failure, which is code 4. There hasn't been an exception when boot processing process failed to return function value when evaluated. Moving on to the next question, explain the concept of stub in Node.js. So stubs are used in writing tests, which are important part of development. It replaces the whole function which is getting tested. So this helps in the scenarios like when there is an external call that makes tests slow and difficult to write. For example, HTTP calls or database calls, triggering different outcome for a piece of code. Example, what happens if an error is thrown, if it passes or if it's failed, etc. Now, this is the example function that we have. So basically, we are requiring a request module, and then there is a function get photos by album where we have a URL and there is a promise returned, which basically takes success and failure. So if there is an error, we return a reject, and if it is successful, we just resolve with json.parse with the body, and we are just exporting it so that other functions, or you can use this particular function other anywhere else. So to test this function, so the example stub they have given, and which initially requires some modules and then takes that particular function and then creates before and after, like what would happen. So it basically creates a sort of mock response sort of thing, that is what should be returned if there was no API call. Okay, so that's in short about it. Next, we have some advanced Node.js interview questions. So question number 30 asks, what is an event emitter in Node.js? So event emitter is a class that includes all objects that are basically capable of emitting events. This can be done by attaching named events that are emitted by object using an event emitter.on function. Thus, whenever object throws an event, it should be event, the attached functions are invoked synchronously. For example, we just are creating an object for event emitter, and then we are creating a class which extends event emitter, that we the object that we just created, and then we are creating a variable my emitter, and then we are doing an on function on a particular event. So it, for now in this, it basically logs a particular text, and for emitting that particular emitter that we just created, we just do my emitter.emit with the parameters if we have created anything. Moving on to next question, question number 31, enhancing Node.js performance through clustering. Now, Node.js application run on single processor, which means that by default they don't take advantage of multi-core system. Cluster mode is used to start up multiple Node.js processes, thereby having multiple instances of the event loop. When we start using cluster in Node.js app, behind the scene multiple Node.js processes are created, But there is also a parent process called the cluster manager, which is responsible for monitoring the health of individual instances of our application. So we have cluster manager and different worker instances. So moving on to question number 32, what is thread pool and which library handles it in Node.js? So we have already seen this. It is handled by libuv library, and it is a multi-platform C library that provides support for asynchronous I/O operations such as file system, networking, and concurrency. So they have given a sort of flow diagram, that is the code that we write. Then we have nodes, which contains multiple modules at http, file system, crypto, path, etc., which basically takes v8 engine and libuv library into account. Now moving on to question number 33, what is WASI and why is it being introduced? So WebAssembly provides an implementation called as WebAssembly System Interface specification through WASI API in Node.js implemented using WASI class. Now the introduction of WASI was done keeping in mind it's possible to use the underlying operating system by a collection of POSIX-like function, thus further enabling the application to use the resources more efficiently and the features that require system level access. Moving on to question number 34, how are worker threads different from clusters? So some of the points that we have in cluster is that there is one process on each CPU with an inter-process communication to communicate, that is an IPC. In case we want to have multiple servers accepting HTTP requests, that is why single port clusters are helpful. The processes are spawned in each CPU, thus will have separate memory and node instance, which will further lead to memory issues. Now, what are worker threads? So there is only one process in total with the multiple threads, and each thread has one node instance, one event loop, and one JS engine, with most of the APIs accessible. Now they shares memory with other thread, that is example with shared array buffer. Now this can be used for CPU intensive tasks like processing data or accessing file system. Since Node.js is single threaded, synchronous tasks can be made more efficient leveraging the worker threads. Question number 35, how to measure duration of async operation. So performance API provides us with the tools to do that, and we can do it using async hook and preference hook. So you can take a look at this code. We are basically importing those two modules, preference hook and async hooks, creating the hook, and then we can use performance.mark, performance.measure, etc. We once we have created the hook, we need to enable it. We can create a new performance observer object, and then you can observe to that with the appropriate parameters that you want to give. Moving on to question number 36, how to measure the performance of async operations. So performance API provides us with a tool to figure out the necessary performance metrics. So this would be very similar to the previous questions that we saw. We require preference hook, we import that and then create a new performance object. We log certain things, whatever we want to do, and then we create we call the object performance observer dot observe. Then we can also do performance.measure, performance.mark, and in the function whatever we are doing some extensive task, so in here it is this, we can do performance.measure, mark, etc. So that's all for this Node.js interview questions video. I hope you got something useful from it. If you want more such interview questions for other topics, you can check the playlist for top interview questions. And yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe to video. That's all, and I'll see you in the next one.